Before I begin, I bring to all of you the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Our body, in the sense that the number of human cells is less than the number of bacterial cells in the body. These estimates have been changing over the last few decades, but one thing which is common to all those estimates is that the number of human cells is less than the number of bacterial cells. I put bacterial within quotes because that includes not only bacteria, but technically speaking, but also fungi, viruses, and other microorganisms. So all these microorganisms put together exceed in number the number of human cells in the body. So in fact, we are more germs than human. So why this is important is that just imagine if these figures are the latest figures are the right ones, 68 trillion cells of different type, about half of those human and half of them non-human, living in harmony with each other. 68 trillion cells, and keeping us alive for so many decades. That itself is a wonder. And further, these 38 trillion cells cannot be without a meaning, cannot be without an effect on the human body. And this is a newly emerging subject. We don't understand it fully in modern medicine. The concept is called microbiome. So the relationship between the microbiome and the health of an individual is a topic which is going to develop very fast over the next few decades. But in a very large number of these bacteria, in a way, the majority of these bacteria reside in the intestines, particularly in the large intestine. So if in the context of that, we think of the ancient assertion in systems like Ayurveda, that as is the gut, so is the health, which means if you have a healthy gut, you will have a healthy body, makes a little sense. So a lot of diseases will probably get traced to the bacteria, and because the bacteria are in the largest number in the gut, it will get traced to gut. So we are like a hotel, and the germs reside not only in the gut, they also reside in the mouth, on the skin, and in the genital tract, just about everywhere. Now these are our, but every guest equally welcome. No, that is not, because we also infiltrators which might be harmful to us. These guests are friendly and live in a symbiotic relationship, which means we help their survival by offering them a place, and they also help us in many ways in keeping us healthy. So it's a give and take relationship, and we have learned to live with each other. In fact, if they are missing or if they are changed in their character, that is, if instead of one set of guests, we get another set of guests, which may not kill us, but may make us unhealthy, then there is a problem. And that's why, these days you would have heard that in many diseases, doctors recommend that you take some probiotics and prebiotics. Now, what these probiotics and prebiotics do is to try and change the nature of these germs residing in our body from one set to another set. And traditionally, we know curd has those germs which are healthy for us and which keep us in better health. So sometimes when the tummy is upset and or we have taken antibiotic for diarrhea, so that the normal residents have been cleared from there to some extent. So to prevent some other type of bacteria taking their place, we want to replace those by healthy ones as much as possible. So we give curd, we give lactobacilli capsules and things like that. So they're infiltrators. And the body should be able to deal with these also, because some of them may give us disease and occasionally also cause death. And therefore, we should be able to deal with them. And in this sense, the guests behave like family. In this sense that they also help us fight infiltrators. They provide a competition to the infiltrators for food and other resources, and sometimes also try to eliminate them so that they continue to live in their home. They treat our body as home, not as a hotel. And so they help us just the way the family would. Then we have some other defense mechanisms. The first defense mechanism is all over our covering, that is the skin. And the places which cannot be covered with skin are vulnerable. Anything from outside may enter through those openings. Also have a local defense mechanism. The mouth, the nose, the eyes, the tears and the nasal secretions. They also have antibacterial substances, and so has the mouth, and so has the skin. And of course, if something gets up to the stomach, then many germs, harmful germs, get eliminated by the large quantity of acid in the stomach. So this we call a sort of a fence all around the body. But then there are harmful organisms which can jump the fence and still get in. So then what? No fence, after all, can be invincible. So then we have our immune system. And all the cells of the immune system are the white blood cells. So what we learned in school, that we have two types of cells in the blood, red and white, and the white ones protect us from disease, is in a sense true, because all the immune cells belong to the white blood cell family, and we may call them our police and army and so on, and sentinels. And all white blood cells are born in the bone marrow. So these are some of the general statements about the immune system. Now, immune system is generally divided into two, innate and acquired. Innate is the immunity which we are born with. It is there right at birth, but it is non-specific. Non-specific is in the sense that it is not for one particular germ. It is for a very large variety of germs. It acts in the same way for all of them. And sometimes it also works against some harmful chemicals. So it's a very useful system. And in a way, if defense is the first line of defense, this is our second line of defense, distributed all over. It does not require prior exposure also, which means that even if we are getting exposed to that type of a germ for the first time, the system will still work very efficiently, and it retains no memory of a prior exposure, which means every experience with a germ is treated as a fresh experience. But at the same time, it is a very useful system, and in fact, even the acquired system is very closely linked to it, as we shall see. Now, this innate immunity, the mechanism that it uses is a very primitive mechanism. This is the type of mechanism which evolved in single-celled animals. Before there was even a cell with more than one cell. Just imagine, how many billions of years ago that would be if we look at evolution from single-celled to multi-celled and multi-celled to plants and animals and then human beings. How many billions of years that is, but this is one mechanism that has been observed. Now, this mechanism is called phagocytosis. Phago means eating, cyto is cell, so it is eating by a cell. This is the mechanism by which these single-celled organisms acquired their food and also probably dealt with some harmful substances, but this was primarily their mechanism of eating. So when a single-celled organism found near itself something which could be used as food, it had some sort of an attraction for it. Then it had the capacity to change its shape. As you see in picture number 2, it threw its arms around it as if, to hug it. And you might say that this is very deceptive. Huh? How can the organism love something which it's going to eat up? You don't eat up someone whom you love. But then that reminds me of that witty sentence by George Bernard Shaw, who said that the tiger loves you. And then to that he added, no love is more sincere than the love for food. So this single-celled germ also probably follows the same policy, throws out its arms to enclose this food in a hug. And then quickly it folds itself up in such a way that now this food is not just hugged, it is within the cell. And then once it is within the cell, then this red circle, this is a lysosome in the cell. Lysosome digestive enzymes. So this lysosome and this food which are now inside, they come close together and the two fuse. So now the food and the digestive enzymes are all in one enclosure in the cell. And then these enzymes break up this food and make small particles out of it, exactly the way we digest our food. So it's something similar, but at the same time, digestion is far more complex. But when it comes to dealing with germs, our innate immunity works in exactly the same way. We also have phagocytes, which are in the blood, and from the blood they migrate to tissue, and so they are scattered all over in all the tissues, and that is where they act as uh, eating cells, cells which eat up the harmful organisms which enter our body. That is our first line of defense. So this innate immunity is present all over, and the type of cells which form these phagocytes are the monocytes in the blood. Monocytes are one type of white blood cells, and when they go to the tissues, when they migrate to the tissues and become phagocytes, we call them macrophages. Macro, because they are large-sized cells, and they eat. So macrophages, they act like guards. Gali gali mein guard hota hai. So they act something like that. And the method that they use is to eat up the organism. So we may call it lynching. So they are primitive cells, and they use a very primitive method to finish off the infiltrator. They lynch it. But there are some germs which they can't lynch. They're too difficult for them to eat. So then what they do is they hand them over to a less primitive. I call it less primitive. I have not called it very advanced, because even that less primitive mechanism, that is the acquired immunity, is also not very recent. It is there in all the animals, and the animals have also the multicellular creatures like fish and the frog and the dog and the cat. They have also been around for a very long time. So they also have this innate immunity as well as acquired immunity. So acquired immunity is not very primitive, but it's less primitive as compared to this eating mechanism by the single cell. So if our phagocytes are first or second line of defense, the innate immunity, they can't lynch the germ, they at least internalize it and then hand it over to this less primitive, well-trained force. Well-trained force is this acquired immunity, like the police and the army. They have to be trained in a police academy or in the National Defense Academy. So they are a well-trained force, and they hand over to भाई आप संभाल लो हमारे बस का नहीं है. So but at least they can take it there. Not only that, the body also has a mechanism that if the germ is so difficult that they can't even go there to hand over this germ to the well-trained force, the macrophage sends a distress call, you might say, that I am in trouble, please help me. So then these well-trained, some cells from this well-trained force come there to help it out, so that then the acquired immunity can get into action. If the mountain want to go to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. So both ways it works. Most of the time it is the phagocyte which internalizes the germ and then takes it to the well-trained force to be handed over to the participants in the acquired immunity, hands them over to them कि आप संभालो मेरे बस का नहीं है. But if it can't do even that, they just sends a distress call, an SOS message, to which the acquired immunity responds. So it's a very well organized system, you can see, but the macrophage, the single cell which has this mechanism of eating, which evolved in single celled animals, helps us to this day. It's a very well conserved mechanism which has been there throughout evolution of all the types of animals, including the most primitive animals and plants. At that level, there was no animal and plants were just one cell. So it has been preserved from then on till now. Now coming to acquired immunity. We generally call it acquired immunity. It is specific to a germ. Immunity which has been acquired to one germ may at the most work for some other similar related germs, but it does not work for all the germs. This is the immunity which we are not born with, it is acquired. And how is it acquired? By exposure to that germ. But then how long does it take to acquire it after birth? Generally speaking, at least 1.5 years for it to be reasonably good. Then how does the child survive the first 1.5 years? With the help of antibodies which were passed on to the child from the mother's blood when it was in the mother's womb, and the antibodies which are passed on by the mother in her milk to the baby. So what saves the baby while it is growing up and does not have a well developed acquired immunity. But then even then, this infrastructure has been laid by 1.5 years. It has not yet acquired the immunity to all the organisms because it has not been exposed to many of them. This requires prior exposure. And that is why there's hardly any child who does not get a fever off and on. And that is how it is getting exposed to different types of germs and acquiring immunity to more and more of them, with the result that by the time the child is about 15-year-old, the child hardly falls ill. Seems to be in good health all the time, does not need any sick leave throughout the year. He can keep attending school without taking any leave for illness. Further, what is beautiful about this specific acquired immunity is that it also has memory, which means that once the person has been exposed to a germ, responds to it, then it remembers so that the next time it responds to that germ much better and faster. So now we come again to the same phagocyte, and now it is near a germ. And I've purposely drawn this germ with these red spiky things on its surface because we are now all very familiar with the coronavirus, and it is said to have a spike protein on its surface, and this spike protein acts as the antigen. Now, every germ has a protein which can stimulate acquired immunity, and that which stimulates the development of acquired immunity is called the antigen. Anti means against, means to give. So something which leads to a response which is against. So in a way, the germ itself carries something which will give rise to a response in our body which will be against the germ. So that's why this thing on the surface is an antigen. And you might say that it is quite stupid on the part of the germ to carry something on its surface to which our immune system can respond, and then that will work against the germ. But then that is nature's economy. That is how nature works. Germs also have to live, we also have to live, and this is how we manage to live in spite of these germs. And the germs also have not become extinct, and probably they never will. Probably they'll outlast us. We might become extinct before the germs. So they both live, and part of the reason we are able to live is because the germs carry themselves a chemical, a protein, which will evoke immunity in our body, and that is the antigen. So here I've shown it as this red spiky thing on the surface of the germ. Now we have this phagocyte or macrophage. They are scattered all over the body, but this germ is difficult for the phagocyte to deal with on its own. So what it has done, as you can see in this other picture here, is that it has internalized this germ and then brought to the surface these spikes. Now, by bringing these spikes to the surface, this cell will be able to present this antigen to this specific immune system. So that's why it's called the antigen presenting cell. So now this phagocyte is acting as the antigen presenting cell. It will present this antigen to the immune system. कि भाई ये पकड़ के लाया हूँ और ये इसकी पहचान है. It's like a nameplate. This is the nameplate it had. Now you deal with it. So it's carrying that nameplate right on the surface. So this macrophage, which acts as the antigen presenting cell, hands over this germ to the well-trained force, police or border security force or army in different types, and we have all these different types depending on where the germ is and what type of germ it is and what the situation is. But whatever it is a well-trained force. And if it's a well-trained force, where did it go to school and college? Now let's see where this training takes place. All these cells are white cells, and all cells, white cell or red cell, they develop in the bone marrow. So the place of birth of all these cells which participate in acquired immunity is the bone marrow, because they all belong to the white cell family. But the white cell family to which they belong is not the same as the one to which the macrophages belong. Macrophages are derived from the monocytes. These are derived from the lymphocytes. So all the immune cells are derived from the lymphocytes. So what I have started with here is the pluripotent cell. Pluripotent cell is a primitive cell in the bone marrow, which is still undifferentiated. It may give rise to any other type of blood cell. So that's why I call pluripotent, which means its potency is plural, multiple potency. It's like a newborn child who theoretically can develop in any direction as it grows up, depending upon what type of schooling it has. And the first level of schooling is at home. So this pluripotent cell also undergoes this home schooling, and the parents make out while doing the schooling that this particular child is destined to be a lymphocyte, and they make a lymphocyte out of it. Some of these pluripotent cells will become red cells or other types of white cells, but here we are talking about the lymphocyte. So we say that the pluripotent cell, then cells, they differentiate in some cases into a lymphocyte. Whether it is because the pluripotent cell itself was different, or whether it is because the body, even it makes all these cells in the proportion in which we need them, that can be debated. But then the type of schooling that this pluripotent cell receives in this case is such that it now becomes a lymphocyte. But it has not become highly specialized. For that, it has to go to some college, higher education. Now that higher education, 1% of lymphocytes is within the bone marrow itself. So it goes to a neighborhood college and becomes what we call a B lymphocyte. Some others are sent to a distant college, and that is the thymus. Thymus is in the neck, behind the thyroid. So they are sent to the thymus, and thymus is a very school, probably more tough than the bone marrow, and it's a very demanding school. It gives rigorous training and leads to a high level of specialization, giving rise to at least 3 different types of what we call T lymphocytes. T, because they have undergone this education in the thymus, and B, because these cells underwent training in the bone marrow. So 3 different types of lymphocytes. Apart from that, the thymus does one more thing, which is very important. What the thymus does besides training these is some of the students which are sent to this thymus are found to be rowdy, antisocial elements. These are the lymphocytes which, if allowed to develop, will develop immunity against the body itself, which means they'll start working against some of the cells which belong to our own body. We don't want that. We don't want our own immune system to start working against our pancreas or our brain or whatever. Although occasionally that does happen when this mechanism goes wrong, and that is what we call autoimmunity. But autoimmunity is prevented to a large extent, by and large, because lymphocytes are sent to the thymus, make sure that those lymphocytes might damage the cells of our own body, they are eliminated. So it shoots the antisocial elements instead of letting them get out of the school. इनको school में खत्म कर देते, school or college, whatever you like to call it, and releases only 3 different types of T cells. 3 actually is a simplification, because immunology now so well developed that there are very large, sort of very complicated classification of all these different types of lymphocytes. But broadly speaking, they fit into 3 categories: Th, that is T helper cells; Tc, that is cytotoxic T cells; and Tk, that is killer T cells. So now we have this well-trained B lymphocytes, T helper cells, T cytotoxic cells, and T type of killer cells. And where do they go and settle? They go and settle by and large in the lymph nodes, the gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, and the spleen. So these are the places where they go and colonize, and all these areas have lymphoid tissue, as we say, which has B cell areas and T cell areas within them. So we might say that these areas are the barracks where these soldiers are sent. So once the education is over, B and T cells settle in these barracks, and these barracks are the lymph nodes, the gut, respiratory tract, and the spleen. What is the rationale? The rationale is that lymph nodes are scattered throughout the body. So And there are lymphatics which connect every part of the body to the nearest lymph nodes, which we call regional lymph nodes. So if there's an infection in any part of the body, the organisms can be taken to the nearest lymph node. So that is why we have lymph nodes scattered all over the body. And these lymph nodes then have the soldiers, which are a part of the acquired immune system. Why the gut and the respiratory system? Because these require special protection. These are the two places which are open to the external environment more than the rest of the body. Whatever we eat, we are putting into our stomach and intestines many things, including germs. And the same is true of the respiratory tract. With the air that we breathe, we are taking in lots of germs. And there are many local mechanisms like, say, the germs sticking in the nose or the cilia in the trachea, sweeping them up so that we don't inhale them and they don't reach the lungs. But suppose they do reach the lungs and they reach the intestines, they bypass the acid in the stomach, then the gut and the respiratory tract have their own lymphoid system. You might say a private security system, apart from the general. So they have a private security system, and that is why they have their own lymphoid tissue, which works slightly differently as compared to the general acquired immune system. But at the same time, it is also specific, and it, by and large, is able to protect us from many things. And that is why if germs are able to bypass this local system, then it can lead to a more serious problem for the whole body. So many of the germs are taken care of right at the entry level through the gut or through the respiratory tract. They are specially equipped with B and T cells, which are a highly trained force. How about the spleen? That is also like a big lymph node. It has B cells, it has T cells, but at the same time, you might have heard that some people's spleen is removed for a disease. Nothing much happens. Why? Because it doesn't seem to have any very specific function. So you may call it the CRPF, or Central Reserve Police Force. If it is there, maybe it helps us in some situations, but if it is not there, the defense, the soldiers that we have in these barracks in the lymph nodes, the gut and the respiratory tract are quite enough to protect us. Okay. Now, we look at this phagocyte or macrophage. These are present everywhere, all over the body. The ordinary guards, who are there in every street. Every colony has so many of them. The germ, the same which the phagocyte itself can't eat up and leave. It has these spikes on the surface, and what it does is to bring out these so that the nameplate is carried on the surface. And why is this important? That is important because the antigen presenting cells will find the right soldier, and in this the T helper cells help them. So when this macrophage reaches say the regional lymph node, then how to find the right soldier? The T helper cells help them, guide, handhold them, and take them to the right soldier. What does the right soldier really mean? Right soldier means the soldier or the lymphocyte which is specially equipped to manufacture a defense mechanism or some sort of a defense against this particular antigen, this spike. It's so specialized. Now, you might say that maybe this soldier can do many things. It will study this and then come up with how to solve this problem. But it is not so. This is the most amazing part of our biology, that we have thousands of germs, and for all these thousands of germs, we have thousands of specialized lymphocytes, each one of them capable of defending us against only one organism or other organisms which are closely related. That's all. Now, how did nature anticipate what all germs we will be exposed to? Maybe when the human beings evolved, all these germs were not even around. Finding right now that there are so many new strains of coronavirus coming up, which were not there even 1 year ago. How did the body anticipate that all these different types of germs will come and therefore be prepared in advance for dealing with each one of them? This is nothing short of a miracle. And this miracle resides within our own body. And compare this with what scientists do. They take 1 year to study one strain of coronavirus, then come up with a vaccine, which probably works with some efficiency, 70, 80%, 90% efficiency for that particular strain. But as soon as a new strain comes, a mutant virus comes, they are not able to work equally well against that. The body has cells which can deal with each one of these strains, those which came in the past, those which are coming today, those which will come in the future. How nature has put all those cells within this little body in those little barracks is amazing. So this is the beauty of the immune system. Now let's see what happens further once this antigen presenting cell has reached there and is being helped by a T helper cell find the right type of soldier, or you can say actually the right type of factory. The factory which can manufacture the arms which are specific for this particular germ. So here is the antigen presenting cell. It is helped this T helper cell in selecting. So how do they select? On the basis of, again, a protein which is on the surface. So this is a protein on the surface which is the antigen. Here is a protein on the surface which tells that I can deal with this particular type of antigen. So that's why all these different, they all have a different type of protein on the surface. The one which has this triangular thing will easily accept this triangular thing. So that is the idea. So in other words, this fit is like that of a key and a lock. So all these keys are ready, or at least key factories are ready before even the lock has come. For this new lock and for all the locks which will come in future, exists a small little factory of a few cells at least. So that right factory has been selected. So you might say that this thing on the surface, this was the nameplate of the germ. The nameplate of the factory says that I am a factory which manufactures this. So the factory has been selected. So this germ, this lymphocyte has been selected for this particular germ on the basis of this antigen. Now once it has been selected, it has to be activated and it has to proliferate, which means it has to multiply in number. Because just a few cells like this exist. There are only a few of each type. But then once it has been selected that right now required, it is activated and it undergoes a multiplication. Its tribe multiplies. And that multiplication is such that it produces cells which are exactly like itself. Each one of them having the same type of capability of manufacturing something which will be able to neutralize this particular antigen. So here we have all these cells. They have multiplied. This one has multiplied, and we call them effector cells because they are the ones which will give effect to the immunity. But then it does one more remarkable thing while multiplying. It makes a few memory cells also. Because with all these, once they are sent to the battle, they may not come back. Soldiers, their life is uncertain. May not come back. So we may not be left with them in the body. What we left with, once again, only a few cells of this type. But then along with that, if this factory has made a note somewhere that this is the type of germ it came once, this is how I dealt with it, next time it is better prepared. So these memory cells serve that function. So a few memory cells have been added to the barrack of the same type which correspond to this germ, this cell which has been selected. And remember, memory cells will come to them again because normally the tendency is to forget the memory cells. The memory cell doesn't forget, but we forget the memory cell. We feel as if the response has to take place afresh every time. But the response is much better the next time because of these memory cells. The next time we are exposed to the same germ, the response is much better. Okay. Now, specific acquired immunity is of two types. And in some cases, the effector cells that mediate what is called cell-mediated immunity. And in this case, the effector cells are sensitized T cells, which can kill, which can produce cytokines of different types. You heard of the cytokine storm and so on. And then we have humoral immunity, which works on the basis of manufacturing antibodies. We'll not talk much about or talk anything about cell-mediated immunity now, but as you can see, these two are closely related. The mechanism by which they are stimulated is similar, and sometimes for the same infection, at different stages of the infection, it may be one type of immunity working and some other stage another type of immunity working. But we can say that when the organism has to be neutralized in the blood, then humoral immunity is useful because antibodies circulate in the blood. Whereas if a germ is inside a cell or hiding inside a cell, or it has generally stays inside a cell, then cell-mediated immunity will be more useful. But then we'll talk more about humoral immunity because it's antibodies which everybody is talking about these days, and the humoral immunity is about production of antibodies. So the effector cells in humoral immunity are the B cells, which further undergo a little transformation to form what are called plasma cells. And it is these plasma cells which manufacture the antibodies. So the action on humoral immunity is through production of antibodies. Now, how does the antibody work? That's again beautiful, huh? The way antibody works. This diagram is extremely diagrammatic. Oh, that's also work, but this is extremely diagrammatic. Antibody is a molecule. I drawn it so big. Huh? It has some resemblance to the way the antibody molecule is generally visualized, but the important thing that I've tried to show in this is that it has 3 binding sites. Every antibody has 3 binding sites, only one of which is specific for the germ. So this is that specific binding site which is specific for this protein. In this case, I've tried to show it again as the spike protein. So this is the part of the antibody which is specific for this. But why are there 2 other binding sites? One is for the phagocyte, because ultimately that is the amazing part. So this primitive cells evolved rescue this antibody-mediated immunity. The antibody itself cannot the germ. It can only bind the germ because it has a specific binding site to which it can attach. So it's like a lock and key arrangement. So the lock is there, the key is there, but the lock and the key alone, their combination is not enough, because you want to get rid of the lock, you need a hammer, and that hammer is the phagocyte which will eat it up. So the antibody has one site for the germ, one for the site. Why is there a third site? It does not seem to be able to eat this germ unless there is another protein present which is present in the blood, which we call complement, because it complements the function of the antibody. Complement is not a single protein. Again, it is generated through a cascade of reactions, chemical reactions at the right time, in the right way. An extremely complicated mechanism, but to simplify it, just call it the complement, the final thing which is required for which binds here. So 3 binding sites, one for the germ, one for the complement, without which the phagocyte cannot eat it, and one for the phagocyte itself, so that it is near the food. So in a way, I've compared the antibody to a dining table. The dining table has the food. It also has the sauce. The complement is like the sauce, unless the food becomes tasty, this this phagocyte will not eat it. Phagocyte is the diner, the one who will eat. So this arrangement is now complete. Now this phagocyte can food along with the sauce, eat it up, and that's how the germ is dealt with by the antibody. Okay. So this is our antibody-based mechanism. As I said, don't forget the memory cell. So we come back to the memory cell again. Now here is a very general diagram. Each disease will be different, but general diagram showing the time from the beginning to 100 days and the antibody level in the blood for that particular germ. Or rather, the antigen of that particular germ. What is the antibody level or the concentration of antibodies? Now, when is the first time the person is exposed to that germ? The mechanism is very efficient, but it takes time. It may be about 3 weeks by the time the antibody level reaches its peak, and then it starts coming down also and is slow. And then suppose the person gets exposed to the same infection a second time. This time you find that within 2 days, the response has come up and mounted to an unprecedented high level. So response is both and steep, and then again the antibody levels start coming down. Now, this is probably a good opportunity to talk about what, in the media these days a lot is talked about. Some people who got infected, they don't show the antibody. Some people who got infected show the antibody. Some people showed the antibody, but now the antibody levels have come down. Now, all this is completely natural and normal. Some people got infected, they didn't show the antibodies. Why? Because probably they were dealt with in the respiratory tract itself. And they don't need the antibodies which circulate in the blood. No, we saw there are many levels of defense. And one of the levels are, this is a virus which enters through the respiratory tract. We have a local immune mechanism within the respiratory tract. And some were probably dealt with in the nose and the airways and probably did not even reach the lungs. So all that is full of this local defense mechanisms. So if that happened, the person got infected, got some mild symptoms like a running nose or a cough, and then the antibodies were not seen. But because the germ was there in the nose and the throat, if a test was done, the person was COVID positive. So he got COVID positive, he got COVID, he got cough, he recovered, but there are no antibodies. There will be no antibodies because this person was quite healthy. In fact, much larger number would be those who did not even get a cough. It was dealt with very quickly and nothing happened to the person. The person remained in blissful ignorance whether he had COVID. And if no test was done, the person remained ignorant, blissfully ignorant of this infection and recovered from it. Rather, not recovered, got rid of the germ without he knowing it or anybody knowing it. That was probably the largest number of people. A few in whose cases the virus reached the blood and blood circulating antibodies are required, they were the ones who developed these antibodies. They developed antibodies, but then the antibodies were detected when they were at their peak, maybe after about 3 weeks or so. After that, they have to come down. You see, if they do not come down, if antibodies remain at high level throughout, imagine the thousands of germs that we have dealt with in our body. If all those antibodies were to stay at high level, our blood will be full of only antibodies. In fact, a high gamma globulin level, all these antibodies are gamma globulin. A high gamma globulin level is an abnormality, which is generally associated with liver disease. Why that is so, we'll not go into that. But you cannot have high levels of antibodies to all the germs that we have dealt with so far circulating in the blood all the time. The level has to come down after a month or two. But what is important is don't forget the memory cell. The memory cells are still there. And therefore, if now this person gets infected again with the same virus, he'll mount a much more brisk response and a steep response. Now, this is also a right time to talk about the principle of vaccination. Now, the principle of vaccination is that instead of giving the whole germ to the body, we give a part of the germ which evokes the immune response. We saw the immune response is evoked by the antigen. So the vaccine provides the antigenic stimulus for giving the disease. Technically, we say that the vaccine has antigenicity but no pathogenicity. Antigenicity, which means the properties of the antigen it has, but it has no pathogenicity, which means it does not have the capacity to produce disease. So that is what we call a vaccine. So when you do that, the body is tricked into believing that this germ has entered the body because it has entered or the antigenicity has entered, and we get this response. Now, if the person actually gets this infection, the person is getting it for the first time, but the body treats it as if it is getting it for the second time because it got its experience for the first time through the vaccine. So the body treats it as if it is getting this experience for the second time, not the first time. And therefore, the response is much more brisk. And therefore, either the person does not fall ill or the symptoms are very mild. So this is the principle on which vaccination works. But then this is a specific immune response, and therefore, the response to one germ does not guarantee that the similar response will be there to another germ. Another germ may still be treated as the first infection, not the second infection. So a person has acquired immunity to a previous strain of the coronavirus does not make the person immune to all the future strains of coronavirus. That's why this flu and related virus is a flu-related virus. These viruses have this tremendous capacity to mutate, and that's why we have so many strains of these viruses, and they never really become completely. But the body knows how to deal with each of them, because you've seen that we have an amazing system within the body which seems to anticipate what all types of germs will come even in the future. So now you can understand why I have called this immune system our super PPE. And of course, it is silent because it doesn't make any noise like the noise that create. It works silently, and it is this super PPE that has helped us and the rest of the animal world. Animals don't get any antibiotics and they don't get any vaccines when they are ill. So they recovered from all the infections without antibiotics, and they have fought all the infections with the help of their immune system and recovered. Not that animals don't die or human beings don't die. Immortality is something which still seems to be beyond us, but what is important is that we live a reasonable expected lifespan with the help of this silent super PP. We do, and a purpose written the rest of the human world, rest of the animal world, because we are also a type of an animal, and it is with the help of this super PPE, as marvelous personal protection equipment built into the body, with the help of which we have survived for millions of years. And so has the rest of the animal world. Now, what is important is, which is again not sufficiently emphasized, is that this immune system is subject to modulation. And this is something which doctors also forget quite often. The reason is that we know a lot of details about the immune system. What I have told you may be about half of what I know, but then what I know is not even 1% of what a top immunologist would know. And what a top immunologist knows would also be only a small fraction of what all is known. And what all is known is only a small fraction of what all remains to be known. So you can understand the complexity of the immune system. But still enough is known for a medical student to be taught enough of details of the immune system for the person to get lost in those details of which cell, which cytokine, which this and which that, what interacts with what to give rise to what, that he forgets that this is not something which inevitably happens in exactly the same way in everyone all the time. It is a system which is a part of a dynamic entity called a living being. And so this entity is also dynamic. It is subject to modulation. It can become stronger and it can become weaker. And when it is stronger, we can deal with infections much better. It is weaker. And this accounts for the different response of different individuals to even the coronavirus pandemic. As I said, some probably got infected but remained blissfully unaware of it. Some got only a cough. Some got fever, and some got such severe symptoms that they had to be hospitalized. So this variation is to a large extent because of the variation in the strength of the immune system of the person. Now, what strengthens the immune system? We'll not go into details because today there's not enough time for it. Almost time for me to stop. Are a good healthy diet, and within healthy diet, don't forget the spices because some of our culinary practices overlap the Ayurvedic prescriptions for these spices which improve immunity. So don't forget the spices because they are a very concentrated source of antioxidants which strengthen the immune system. So spices like black pepper and garlic and ginger and turmeric, so on, and several others which have been popularized during the last 1 year. Many of them are actually a normal part of our diet. So a diet which is rich in fruits and vegetables and these antioxidant-rich spices strengthens our immunity. Physical activity, moderate physical activity also strengthens immunity. Then not putting harmful substances into the body. Substances like tobacco, etc., they reduce our immunity. And then adequate good quality sleep. These are some of the important things. Chronic sleep deprivation, which is becoming very common. Voluntarily people are not sleeping enough for various reasons. That is emerging as a major cause of illness, not only lifestyle illnesses, but also diseases which are due to a poor immunity, because inadequate sleep weakens immunity. To some extent, overriding these physical factors like diet, exercise, and sleep are psychological factors. What strengthens immunity is peace of mind, faith, and hope. Correspondingly, immunity is weakened by fear, depression, and lack of hope. This person, Norman Cousins, 75 years, in spite of having been told when he was quite young that he will not live very long, partly because of probably the type of person he was. And there is a beautiful story from his part of his life, starting sometime in the 1960s. In the 1960s, he went to Russia as part of an American delegation for arms limitation talks. He was the leader of the delegation, very well-read, intelligent man, knew both English and Russian. So he was sent there as the leader of the delegation. While returning from there, on the last day, there was a lot of stressful situations, and then he got into a crowded flight. By the time he reached the US, back to the US, he has had about 2 weeks of, sorry, not 2 weeks, 2 days of sleep deprivation, and then within a few weeks he came down with an autoimmune disease. Autoimmune means it's a derangement of the immune system. So something can go wrong with the immune system, and that is what happens in autoimmune disease or an illness. He came down with an autoimmune disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is a painful condition, and he was hospitalized. In the hospital, while reading about this, discovered that the doctors don't have much to offer, and the painkillers that he's getting actually impairing his immunity further, and that vitamin C might help him. So he got himself discharged from the hospital and literally got cured of a disease in which only 1 out of 500 get cured. He became 1 out of those 500 who get cured literally by using a combination of laughter and vitamin C. He started watching a lot of comedies so that he would laugh, and he started taking large amounts of vitamin C and recovered. And he went on to write a book called Anatomy of an Illness as Perceived by the Patient, Reflections on Healing and Regeneration. This book came sometime in the 1970s, and they stimulated a lot of thinking and research in medical circles. And then, as happens in progressive society, they don't have fixed rules. He was not a doctor, he was not a medical man, but he was invited by the University of California at Los Angeles School of Medicine to join on the faculty, so that he could stimulate research in that area and he could stress the importance of the mind-body connection. Medical students, he joined, and with his efforts, he could raise so much of funding for this type of research that the UCLA School of Medicine could not use it. So what they did was they started funding research in other places in the US. So UCLA, apart from doing research on this, also became a funding agency for research on the mind-body connection. And the result was that within 20-25 years, starting sometime in the 1990s, going on to uh, about 2010, maybe even earlier. This research started in the 1970s or 80s. So starting with that, within 25 years or so, this had developed into a new branch of medicine altogether, psychoneuroimmunology. Psycho, the mind, affecting through the nervous system, the immune system, which means that while cheerfulness, happiness, hope, peace, they strengthen the immune system, fear, panic, and loss of hope, they weaken the immune system. So the connection between the mind and the immune system became scientifically established as a result of that research, and the discipline is now called psychoneuroimmunology, and he's treated as the father of psychoneuroimmunology. He discovered it, then modern medicine rediscovered this relationship. Rediscovered because ancient systems of medicine, including allopathy in the days of Hippocrates, knew about the mind-body connection. But then somehow it had got lost in modern medicine. But the spiritual masters have always known it all along. As the mother has said here, establish a greater peace and quietness in your body that will give you the strength to resist attacks of illness. Now, whether a person will fall ill depends upon the interaction of these three things. Agent is the person whose body this germ has entered, and the environment is the environment in which the person lives. You might compare it to the seed. The agent is the seed, and the host is the soil. The seed has been planted in the soil, but whether this seed will grow to the fate of the seed will depend on the soil, and it will also depend upon the environment, that is the climate. So all these three interact together in determining whether a person will get the disease. So just the presence of the coronavirus in the atmosphere does not make everybody sick. The host is important and the environment is important. We have seen what are the differences in the host. The host is the human being, and how his personal protection equipment can be strengthened or weakened. Here is a news item from 24th April on Times Now Digital. People dying of shock and fear in Hyderabad. The pandemic has had such a devastating effect on people tested positive to the extent that many are collapsing and dying of fear. Many means those who have been tested positive. So when they are tested positive, that itself creates such a fear that they collapse and die. So agent is the coronavirus, host is the human being whose personal protection can differ depending upon so many things, particularly mental factors or psychological factors. How about the environment? We've all heard it being said that the environmental pollution, that is the polluted air, is aggravating coronavirus. That we can believe. But then are there also some other subtle factors in the environment which could make a difference? Dr. Alok Pandey is a psychiatrist and a deeply spiritual person and a devotee of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. He has written in one of his books that the environment also includes the current paradigm, the current notions, powerful collective suggestions emanating from our current notions that seep in subconsciously. When to this collective atmosphere we find added the pronouncement of doom from a grave-faced, scientifically trained doctor, then its power to damage and diminish the healing capacity becomes enormous. And unfortunately, this type of atmosphere of fear and hopelessness and a complete dependence on the vaccine has been created by the media to such an extent that and it is being in many cases being articulated by grave-faced, scientifically trained doctors, that people have forgotten that they have a personal protection equipment within, and it can actually diminish the healing capacity as well as that protective capacity of that system. So what can we do about it? One simple thing we can do is don't pay too much attention, don't spend much time on watching what the media are saying. Because it is their job, it is the government's job to collect the statistics. It's the doctors and the scientists' job to tell what is the latest in science as they visualize it. And it is the job of the media to give what a large number of people are likely to see to get higher TRPs. But then what we have to think is of our own security, our own health. And to the extent that we can prevent this, these collective suggestions which fill up the atmosphere from damaging and diminishing our healing capacity, at least one thing we can do is to build an armor around ourselves by exposing ourselves to the least extent to this, and by having faith in the capacity of the body to protect itself, becoming more receptive to a higher force, because after all, this system, this marvelous, amazing system that we talked about, is the handiwork of a higher force. And if we are receptive to that higher force, then the system will work better. And develop a will to overcome the disease, to fight the disease, to keep the disease away, and if we get it, to recover from it. So that will, because just as other things are important, the will to live keeps us alive, the wish to die correspondingly can kill us. So these three things Dr. Alok Pandey has emphasized a lot throughout this book, Veda of the Body, which is a gem. Faith in what the body can do, remaining receptive to a higher force, and developing a personal will. This is how we can apply what we've learned today to the pandemic. Another related quote from a cardiologist, a pioneer in the application of yoga in the treatment of heart disease: not diet, not drugs, not exercise, not smoking, not surgery, not even genetics. No other factor has a more powerful effect on health and premature death and disease than love and intimacy. And this is something spiritual masters have always known. As Sri Aurobindo says in these few words in Savitri, to feel love and oneness is to live. Sri Aurobindo, most of are in IIT. Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch is just across the road, but you will not see this picturesque and sacred part of the ashram meditation hall and the shrine from outside the boundary wall. For that, you have to come inside, and you are welcome to come. Currently, in keeping with the present rules, we are open but have no regular activities. But we are open from 9 to 5, 6 days a week, except on Monday. So Sunday also we are open. So from Tuesday through Sunday, except on Mondays, we are open from 9 to 5. The gate is open. You can come in, you can take a walk in this area. That is no problem. You can sit in the meditation hall and meditate for some time. That is no problem. So you are most welcome to come here and get some positive, peaceful energy from this atmosphere. And of course, if you have any questions, you are always welcome to contact me on email. The email is simple: RAM for Ramesh, BIJ for Bijlani, rambij@gmail.com. Thank you.